There is conflicting information about where and how the Rochester crime family came to be. One of the last mafia families to seize control over the underworld of an American city. Rochester's syndicate had ties to Buffalo, Bonanno, and Pittsburgh crime groups prior to gaining autonomy. Due to the secretive nature of the Italian mafia and its sacred oath of omerta, the true history may never be uncovered. According to the FBI and those in the know, Rochester became an independent family following an internal power struggle in Buffalo that caused a split in their family sometime between the 1950s and the early 1960s. On November 14, 1957, mafia members from all over the United States, Italy, and Cuba met in a summit at Joseph Barber's estate in Apalachin, New York. During this meeting, which was called by Vito Genovese and Stefano the Undertaker Megadino, local law enforcement became suspicious of the expensive luxury cars congregated in the small village and raided the meeting, resulting in the arrests of over 60 mafioso from around the country. The Apalachin meeting became notorious for blowing the lid off Italian-American organized crime, which was once thought of as fictitious. Among those arrested was about a dozen Western New York gangsters. Following the raid, the FBI began to heavily monitor suspected crime figures, and in 1963, Joseph Valachi, a mobster himself, testified before the United States Senate on the existence and state of the American Mafia. During his testimony, Valachi identified by name Frank Valenti and Constance Stanley Valenti, two Rochester brothers who were arrested at the Apalachin meeting as made men, and that the Buffalo crime family controlled most of upstate New York, including Rochester, Syracuse, Utica, and even parts of Ontario, Canada. According to the FBI, at the time of the Apalachin meeting, Stanley Valenti was a member of the Buffalo family running organized crime in Rochester, at the helm of gambling, prostitution, and extortion that fueled a powerful street economy within Monroe County. The fallout from the bust included intense federal surveillance on the Valenti brothers. This hurt their opportunity to make any moves. When Stanley Valenti was arrested in 1957, he refused to cooperate with authorities and was sentenced to 16 months in prison along with his brother Frank Valenti, who was initially briefly jailed and subsequently returned to his native Pittsburgh to work for La Rocca. In the absence of a leader, another longtime crime figure with the backing of Buffalo seized control. Giacomino Russalisi, a Buffalo capo better known as Jake Russo, became boss of Megadino's Rochester crime branch in 1958. Despite being given control of the city, Russo was looked at as a weak leader unable to control his soldiers. In 1961, Canadian mobster and drug smuggler Alberto Aguisi was found dead outside Rochester. It is believed that Russo was responsible for the hit under Buffalo's orders, as Aguisi was planning on killing Stefano Megadino. In wake of the Valachi hearing in 1963, Russo's weak reputation caused him to fall out of favor with Megadino, as he was unable to control unaffiliated gamblers from encroaching on the territory, causing the beginnings of the fissure that would break Rochester off from Buffalo to begin. In 1964, Frank Valenti returned to Rochester after laying low in Pittsburgh, bringing with him his brother and former leader of Rochester, Stanley Valenti, and Pittsburgh associate Angelo Vaccaro. Frank Valenti had spent the last few years working in the underworld of John La Rocca's Pittsburgh crime family, and his brother married the daughter of a Pittsburgh capo. This ignited some tension between Rochester and Buffalo, as Megadino perceived this as a shift in allegiance to another family. Shortly after his return around November of 1964, Frank Valenti threw two massive parties, including one at Eddie's Chop House, crowning himself the boss of Rochester. He was overheard telling guests he was now the man to see in Rochester. Notably, Jake Russo was not invited to these parties as he mysteriously disappeared just days prior. Russo was never heard from again, presumably murdered by Valenti loyalists, and his body was never found. At this point, Valenti solidified power and became the undisputed leader of organized crime in the city.